difference with the voice, to me, one of the key differences is Aboriginal people themselves will get to choose who will represent them.
So what? They can do it right now.
No, let's speak to this because Aboriginal organisations will get to pick those voices. And this is where our failures lie, because we know that nepotism has existed for a long time. We know that there's a lot of Aboriginal people who don't have faith in Aboriginal organisations. We know that there's favouritism that has gone on. And to me, this is going to fall straight back into that trap of favouritism. And if you look at the consultation in terms of the Uluru Statement to the Heart, a big hunk that is ignored were the dissenting voices who didn't agree with that process, who weren't part of that process. It's not a legitimate representation of Indigenous people, but it has been sold to the Australian people that this is what all Indigenous people want, because Indigenous people are often co-opted, certainly by Labor, even by the unions and by organisations, to appear as though they get behind and they support these propositions. But we're not recognised as individuals in our own right like all other Australians are, and we're lumped in a group based on our race, and this is another one of those exercises.
Dean, I want to get you to respond to that. No form of representation is perfect. We only have to look at federal parliament to see that. But how could you make sure that an Indigenous voice is truly representative?
I just got to pick one thing up the Senator said there, that no dissenting voices were heard throughout the Uluru Statement process. I was in every single one of those rooms that heard the views of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples from around the country, urban, regional, remote, grassroots mob, talking about what was important to them. I can assure you that the debates were had, those differences of opinion were heard, and yet after all of that process, the most comprehensive process to engage our mob on this issue, the very clear proposal for a voice came out as the sole option for constitutional recognition. And I think, Chris, I want to actually go back to that. We've got to remember
how many people were consulted?
Just let me finish. We've got to remember that this whole process started with John Howard. Back in 2007, John Howard was the one that said, it is right that the nation should recognise
Is this where we're supposed to genuflect? John Howard.
Aboriginal and Torres Strait. Let me finish, please, Andrew. Let's have a respectful debate. I think the thing that we must do in this whole thing is allow for respect. We must include people, hear the different views. It was Howard that said we must recognise the unique status of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the first peoples, and we should do that through the Constitution. Every single Prime Minister since has held that bipartisan commitment. Coalition, Labor, and it still exists to this day. There's a lot of
that is Indigenous recognition in the Constitution. That is not necessarily a voice, although I think it's a practical reality at the moment that there's a consensus of Indigenous Australians, as much as you can have that, saying there won't be recognition without a voice. It's how Indigenous Australia says they want to be recognised.